Story number 1.
We had been planning our spring break trip for months. Instead of hitting the crowded beaches or partying in the city, my friends and I, Josh, Claire, Derek, and Amanda, decided we wanted something different, something more isolated. Josh's family owned a cabin deep in the mountains of Tennessee, surrounded by thick forests and overlooking a quiet lake. It wasn't fancy, but it had enough space for all of us. And best of all, it was completely free. No hotels, no crowds, just peace, quiet, and a chance to unwind. We set off early in the morning, our car packed with supplies, speakers, and enough beer to last the week. The drive took almost 7 hours, and by the time we reached the last stretch, a winding dirt road leading up the mountain, the sun was already beginning to set. The cabin was beautiful in a rustic kind of way. It had been in Josh's family for generations, a sturdy wooden structure with a wraparound porch and a dock that stretched out over the dark lake. The forest pressed in around us, dense and shadowy, and the air smelled like pine and damp earth. As we unloaded the car, Claire frowned at the house. "There's something weird about it," she muttered. Derek laughed. "It's just an old cabin." "No, it's not that. It just feels off." I didn't want to admit it, but I felt it too. Something about the way the house sat in the clearing, the way the trees seemed to lean in towards it, watching. Inside, the cabin was cozy but old. The furniture was outdated, the floorboards creaked, and there was a faint musty smell, like the place hadn't been used in a while. The living room had a massive stone fireplace, and above it, mounted on the wall, was an old family portrait. Josh pointed at it. "That's my great-great-grandfather. This place has been in my family since the 1800s. The man in the painting was tall and thin, with sunken eyes and a grim expression. There was something unsettling about the way he stared out of the portrait, like he was watching us. Amanda shivered. "Okay, that's creepy." We laughed it off and spent the rest of the evening drinking on the back deck, watching the moonlight shimmer on the lake. The water was still, almost too still, like glass. At some point, Derek stood up. "I'm going for a swim." Josh shook his head. "Nah, man. Water's freezing this time of year." Derek grinned. "That's why I'm doing it." Before any of us could stop him, he stripped down to his boxers and ran down to the dock, diving in with a loud splash. We watched as he surfaced, shivering. "Holy shit, it's cold," Claire rolled her eyes. "Told you." Derek started swimming back to the dock, but then he suddenly stopped. He was just floating there, staring into the water. "Derek," Amanda called. He didn't respond. I felt a chill run down my spine. Then, just as suddenly, he let out a sharp gasp and swam back as fast as he could, pulling himself onto the dock. We ran down to him. "What happened?" Derek sat there, breathing hard, staring at the water. Something touched my leg. We all froze. Josh grabbed a flashlight and shone it over the lake. The beam cut across the water, but we didn't see anything. "It was probably just a fish," Josh said. Derek shook his head. "No, it wasn't a fish. It felt like fingers." We all stood in silence for a moment, then Amanda forced a laugh. "Okay, enough creepy shit. Let's go inside." We left the lake behind and tried to shake off the uneasy feeling, but the night only got stranger. Sometime around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of knocking. Tap, 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 tap. I sat up, my heart pounding. The sound was coming from the front door. I glanced over at Amanda, who was asleep in the bed next to mine. Tap, 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 tap. Rhythmic. I slipped out of bed and crept to the window, peeking out. The porch was empty. Then, as I turned away, something moved in the corner of my vision. A shadow, just beyond the tree line. I grabbed my phone and checked the time, 2:13 a.m. The knocking had stopped. I told myself I was imagining things and went back to bed, but I barely slept. The next morning, Derek looked worse than any of us. He was pale, his eyes bloodshot. "You okay?" Josh asked. Derek nodded but didn't say much. We spent the day hiking and exploring the woods, trying to enjoy ourselves, but the feeling of being watched never went away. Claire kept glancing over her shoulder, and even Josh, who had grown up coming here, seemed on edge. Then, that evening, Amanda found something strange. She had been walking along the edge of the lake when she noticed something half buried in the dirt. She dug it out and held it up. It was an old iron key, rusted and heavy. "Where do you think it goes?" she asked. Josh frowned. "I don't know. There's no locked doors in the cabin." We turned the key over in our hands, uneasy. That night, the knocking came back. Tap, 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 tap. I woke up instantly. This time it was louder, more insistent. I reached over and shook Amanda awake. Do you hear that? She sat up, rubbing her eyes. What? Then the door handle turned. Amanda gasped. What the hell? We bolted out of bed, running into the hallway. Josh and Claire were already there, eyes wide with fear. Then we heard Derek's voice from downstairs. Guys, his voice was wrong, flat, empty. We crept to the top of the stairs. Derek was standing in the middle of the living room, facing the front door. Derek, Claire whispered. Slowly, he turned to look at us. His face was blank, his eyes dark. The door is open, he said. I glanced at the door. It was closed. My blood ran cold. No, it's not, I whispered. Derek frowned, tilting his head like he didn't understand. Then, without warning, he collapsed. We rushed down, shaking him. He gasped awake, eyes wide in terror. I was dreaming. His whole body was shaking. What the hell is happening? Amanda whispered. No one had an answer. The rest of the night passed in terrified silence. At sunrise, we packed our bags and left. As we pulled away from the cabin, I took one last look at the porch, and then I saw it. A figure standing in the trees just beyond the clearing. Tall, thin, watching us. I didn't say anything because somehow I knew if I acknowledged it, it would follow us home. We never talked about that trip again, but sometimes late at night, I still hear knocking. Tap, tap, tap. And I wonder what would have happened if we had opened the door. Story the end.
Story number 2.
The drive down to Cape Hollow was long, the kind of trip where the roads stretched endlessly, disappearing into the horizon. It was the first spring break in years that Olivia, Matt, Brandon, and Jess would be spending together, and they wanted something different. No beaches, no crowded clubs, no loud music, just a quiet coastal town, an Airbnb near the water, and a week of relaxation. Cape Hollow wasn't exactly a tourist hotspot. It was a small, almost forgotten town off the coast of North Carolina, with a population barely scraping past 1,000. The rental house was on the outskirts, where the beach met a rocky cliffside. The listing described it as historic, which Olivia quickly learned was a fancy way of saying old as hell. By the time they arrived, the sun was dipping below the ocean, casting long shadows across the narrow road. The house sat at the edge of a crumbling cliffside, its paint peeling, windows fogged over. Jesus, Brandon muttered. Did you pick a vacation spot or the set of a horror movie? It looked better in the pictures, Olivia admitted. Matt grinned and clapped her on the back. It's got character, and we're here now, so let's make the best of it. Inside, the house smelled like salt and dust. It was bigger than expected, with antique furniture, a fireplace, and floorboards that creaked with every step. The owner had left a note on the kitchen counter. Welcome to Cape Hollow. Please keep the doors locked at night. The wind off the ocean can be strong. Enjoy your stay. Jess raised an eyebrow. That's oddly specific. Probably just doesn't want us messing with their old-ass doors, Matt said, tossing his bag onto the couch. That night, they drank, played music, and explored the house. There was something eerie about the place. Maybe the way the wind rattled the windows or how the ocean outside seemed too still. But with enough alcohol, the weirdness faded and they settled in. At around 2 a.m., Olivia woke up. A sound echoed through the house. It was faint at first, like a whisper carried by the wind. She sat up in bed, listening. Then, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, moving through the hallway just outside her room. She held her breath, her fingers gripping the sheets. Jess was in the next room, and the guys were downstairs. It had to be one of them. Right? Then the footsteps stopped. A floorboard creaked just outside her door. She stared at the handle, heart pounding in her chest. But after a long, tense moment, nothing happened. No knock, no voice. The silence stretched on. She barely slept the rest of the night. The next morning, she told the others. Matt shrugged. Could have been one of us getting up for water. I didn't hear anything, Jess said. Brandon frowned. Me neither. Olivia let it go, convincing herself it had been her imagination. That evening, they walked into town for dinner. Cape Hollow was eerie in a way that was hard to explain. The streets were empty, the few shops that lined the main road closing up before sundown. The air smelled of seawater and something else, something foul. At a small diner, an old man at the counter glanced up at them. His gaze lingered a little too long. You folks staying at the house on the cliffs? He finally asked. Brandon, always the talker, grinned. Yeah, the Airbnb. Got a good deal on it. The old man didn't smile. There's a reason for that. The table fell silent. What do you mean? Olivia asked. The old man's eyes darkened. Nothing. Just keep your doors locked at night. The same warning as the note in the house. No one spoke on the walk back. That night, Olivia locked her door. The wind outside howled louder than before, rattling the windows. Then, at exactly 2 a.m., she woke again, whispering. Not the wind. Voices. Faint. Distant, like they were traveling on the air. She sat up, her skin crawling. It was coming from outside. She crept to the window, heart hammering. The moon was high, casting a silver glow over the ocean. And there, standing on the rocks just beyond the edge of the cliffs, a figure. Pale, motionless, watching. She sucked in a sharp breath. The figure wasn't alone. Several others stood just beyond it, barely visible in the mist. A cold, unnatural fear gripped her. She scrambled back from the window, shoving her blanket over her head like a child hiding from a nightmare. She didn't sleep. By morning, she was exhausted, her hands shaking as she poured coffee. She debated whether to tell the others. Would they even believe her? But before she could decide, Jess spoke. I woke up last night, she said. Thought I heard someone walking outside my door. Olivia's stomach dropped. Matt and Brandon exchanged a look. I thought I heard something too, Brandon admitted. He hesitated, like someone trying the front door handle. A tense silence settled over them. Matt, the skeptic, shook his head. It's an old house. Creaky floors. The wind. Jess glared at him. You really believe the wind tries doorknobs? No one had an answer. By the 5th night, the fear had settled in. They slept with the lights on, keeping close together. But nothing happened. No whispers, no footsteps, no figures on the cliffs. Until the last night. At 3 a.m., Olivia woke to a sound she would never forget. The front door slamming open. She bolted upright, her breath caught in her throat. Then came the footsteps. Heavy. Inside the house. She grabbed her phone, her hands shaking as she turned on the flashlight. Jess's voice came from the hallway, panicked. Did you hear that? Brandon and Matt were already awake, their faces pale. Then, from the bottom of the stairs, a whisper. Low, ragged, not human. It sent a cold, paralyzing dread through Olivia's body. And then the power went out. The house was plunged into darkness. A low creaking sound echoed from the stairwell, followed by the distinct sound of something moving. Then a voice. Right at the bottom of the stairs. You shouldn't be here. Olivia's breath hitched. Something was in the house with them. Matt grabbed his phone, shaking as he turned on the flashlight. He aimed it toward the stairs. For a brief second, they saw it. A woman, or what used to be one. Her skin was pale, waterlogged, her mouth twisted in an unnatural smile. Her eyes were black pits, hollow. She moved. The group screamed. They didn't stop running. Not when they reached the car, not when they tore down the winding road out of Cape Hollow. They didn't go back for their bags. They never even told the Airbnb owner they were leaving. They just drove. The next day, Olivia searched online for anything about Cape Hollow. She found a news article from 1952. A woman had drowned near the cliffs. Her body was found days later, washed up at the base of the rocks. The locals had a name for her, the Hollow Woman. And according to legend, she only appears to visitors who stay too long. Story the end.
Story number 3.
Here's a chilling spring break ghost story for you. The drive to Cedar Bay felt endless, the narrow coastal roads winding through towering cliffs on one side and the black, restless ocean on the other. The rental car's tires hummed against the damp pavement as Ellie scrolled through her phone, idly checking messages. In the driver's seat, Brandon drummed his fingers on the wheel, his eyes darting between the road and the GPS. Behind them, Nikki and Jake bickered over the aux cord. This trip is going to be legendary, Jake declared, finally seizing control and blasting a song too loud for the small car. Brandon chuckled. As long as we don't get murdered in some abandoned beach house, I'm good. Nikki smacked his arm. Don't even joke about that. Ellie smirked, but said nothing. She was here for the adventure, anything to escape the mundane life of midterms and crowded lecture halls. Cedar Bay wasn't exactly a party town, but they had scored an insane deal on an oceanfront rental for the week. As the car twisted around a final bend, the house came into view. A looming Victorian structure sat atop a cliff, overlooking the violent surf below. The house, all weathered gray wood and blacked-out windows, seemed to lean slightly, as if burdened by time itself. A broken gate creaked in the salty wind, and a narrow staircase led down toward the private beach. "Damn," Jake muttered. "This place is straight out of a horror movie." Brandon killed the engine, and silence blanketed the car. "Let's check it out," Ellie said, hopping out. The inside was just as eerie as the outside. Dusty chandeliers hung precariously from the ceiling, and a long hallway stretched into darkness. A faded rug ran beneath their feet, its intricate patterns dulled with age. The air smelled of damp wood and something else, something metallic, like rust. "I thought this was supposed to be renovated?" Nikki wrinkled her nose. Ellie shrugged. "Maybe they exaggerated a bit in the listing." They split up, exploring the house. Ellie ended up in what must have been the library. Dust-covered books lined the shelves, their spines cracked with time. A massive mirror stood against one wall, its frame twisted and gnarled like driftwood. Ellie stepped closer, her breath catching as she swore she saw something move behind her reflection. A shadow, quick, flickering. She spun around. Nothing. She exhaled and shook her head. "Get a grip," she muttered, turning away. But as she left, the mirror stood silent, reflecting not only her, but something else. Something that hadn't been there before. That night, the storm rolled in hard. The wind howled, rattling the old glass windows, and the ocean crashed against the cliffs with an angry roar. Brandon started a fire in the stone fireplace, casting flickering shadows against the walls. They played drinking games, laughed, and tried to ignore the unsettling groans of the old house shifting, until Nikki screamed. Everyone jolted, their eyes darting to where she stood, staring at the hallway. "What the hell?" Jake asked, his voice uneasy. I saw something," Nikki whispered, her face pale. "In the hallway. A woman." Silence thickened the air. Ellie's heart pounded. Brandon chuckled, but it was forced. "You're drunk, Nikki." "I swear to God." Nikki's voice cracked. She was standing right there, long dark hair, and her eyes. Ellie followed Nikki's gaze to the empty hallway. The shadows seemed deeper. "Let's just get some sleep," Brandon said. "It's been a long day." The group hesitated before reluctantly agreeing. One by one, they retreated to their rooms. Ellie lay awake, listening to the storm outside. The bed was too soft, the sheets too cold. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Then, a creak. Her heart stalled. Another creak. Closer this time, the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps. She squeezed her eyes shut, every muscle in her body tensing. And then, nothing. Minutes passed. Finally, she exhaled, convincing herself it was just the house settling, until she felt the breath against her ear. A whisper, soft and hollow. "Get out." Ellie bolted upright, gasping. But the room was empty. The next morning, Nikki refused to leave her room. "Something's wrong with this place," she said, her voice small. Brandon rolled his eyes. "You guys are overreacting." Ellie wasn't so sure. That evening, as the sun dipped below the waves, she wandered outside, needing fresh air. The beach was empty, the tide pulling back to reveal jagged rocks. That's when she saw them. Footprints in the sand, leading from the water toward the house. A cold weight settled in her stomach. They hadn't gone swimming. No one had been out here. So whose footprints were they? A movement in the window above made her blood turn to ice. A figure stood in the library window, watching. Dark hair, hollow eyes, the same figure Nikki had seen. Ellie ran, sighed. Inside, she burst into the living room. "We have to leave, now," Brandon groaned. "Jesus, Ellie? Not you two. I saw her." The room fell silent. Jake shifted uncomfortably. "Okay, maybe this place is a little creepy, but it's not like..." The lights flickered. And then the air turned icy. A slow, scratching sound echoed through the walls. Something moved in the hallway. Not footsteps. Dragging. Nikki started sobbing. Brandon grabbed the car keys. "We're leaving." They stumbled outside, the wind whipping around them, the house looming like a dark silhouette against the stormy sky. The car roared to life, tires skidding against the wet ground. As they sped away, Ellie glanced in the rearview mirror. The woman stood on the porch, watching them. And then, she smiled. The road stretched ahead, but Ellie knew. They had left the house, but they hadn't left her. She had followed. Story the end.
Story number 4.
The road stretched out in front of them, endless and dark, illuminated only by the glow of their headlights. The four friends, Matt, Jess, Brian, and Lisa, had been driving for hours, cutting through the vast, empty highways of Texas, heading toward their long-awaited spring break destination, South Padre Island. This place better be worth the drive, Lisa groaned from the back seat, stretching her arms. I feel like we've been on the road forever. Brian, who was driving, smirked. It's going to be legendary. Beaches, parties, and not a care in the world. Jess, sitting in the passenger seat, yawned. We should find a place to crash for the night. I don't think we'll make it to the coast before sunrise. Matt leaned forward from the back seat. There's got to be some cheap roadside motel around here. Brian checked his GPS. Looks like there's one about 10 miles ahead. Ocean Breeze Motel. Sounds decent enough. As they drove deeper into the night, the road became eerily quiet. No other cars, no streetlights, just an overwhelming darkness that pressed against the windows. Then they saw it. The motel stood alone off the highway, its neon sign flickering weakly. Ocean Breeze Motel, but only half the letters were still glowing. The building was small, run down, and practically swallowed by the surrounding trees. Lisa wrinkled her nose. This place looks like the set of a horror movie. It's just one night, Matt said. Let's grab some sleep and hit the road early. They stepped into the small lobby where a thin, elderly man sat behind the counter. His eyes, sunken and lifeless, barely moved as he handed them 2 room keys. You kids be careful, he murmured, his voice dry and brittle. Brian raised an eyebrow. Okay? Thanks? The man just nodded, watching them leave. Their rooms were side by side at the very end of the motel's dimly lit corridor. The air smelled stale, like mildew and something faintly metallic. Inside, the rooms were simple. 2 small beds, a nightstand, a flickering television, and a window overlooking the empty highway. Jess tossed her bag onto the bed and collapsed beside it. I don't care how gross this place is, I just need sleep. Brian chuckled, setting his bag down. Yeah, first thing in the morning, we're out of here. They shut off the lights. Silence. Then, the knocking started. Soft, rhythmic taps against the wall separating their rooms. Matt's voice came through muffled from the other side. Yo, Jess, Brian, you guys messing around? Brian sat up. What? No. A pause. Then the knocking came again, louder this time. Lisa groaned. It's probably just pipes or something. This place is ancient. Jess rolled over. Forget it. Just sleep. Eventually, the knocking stopped and silence fell over the motel. Hours passed. Jess woke with a jolt. A strange pressure weighed down on her chest like someone was sitting on her. She tried to move, but her limbs wouldn't respond. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps, and then she saw it. A figure. At the foot of the bed. A tall, shadowed silhouette, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. It didn't move. It only watched. Jess tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure took a step forward, then another, and another. It reached the edge of the bed. A raspy, wet whisper filled her ears. You shouldn't have come. Jess's vision blurred. A terrible cold washed over her. Then, nothing. She gasped, sitting up. The room was empty. Her heart pounded as she turned to Brian, still asleep beside her. The clock on the nightstand read 3:12 a.m. Had it been hallucination? She shivered and pulled the blanket tighter around her, trying to convince herself she'd imagined it. Then she noticed the footprints. Wet, leading from the window, straight to her bed. Morning came, but Jess didn't mention what had happened. Neither did Lisa or Matt or Brian. They all seemed off, tired, uneasy, as if no one had truly slept. They checked out without a word. As Brian handed the keys to the old man, he simply nodded. You saw her, didn't you? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Brian froze. What? The man's dull eyes met his. The woman, the one who knocks. Brian felt a cold chill run down his spine. What the hell are you talking about? The old man sighed. You should go. Just don't stop anywhere else on this road. Brian didn't need to be told twice. They got into the car, and silence filled the space between them as they drove away from the motel. The sun was high now, but it did little to warm the cold that had settled in their bones. Lisa was the first to break the silence. I heard it too, she whispered. Jess looked at her. The knocking? Lisa shook her head. No, the whispering. Matt clenched his jaw. I saw her. Everyone turned to look at him. She was standing in the corner, he continued. Long, wet hair. Her mouth. It wasn't right. Jess swallowed. I thought I was dreaming. You weren't, Matt said. Silence again. Brian pressed harder on the gas. They reached the coast by evening, pulling into the bright, bustling town of South Padre Island. People crowded the beaches, music pulsed through the air, and laughter echoed from every direction. It was a different world. A safe world. For the first time in hours, they could breathe. By the time night fell, the nightmare felt distant. They drank, they danced, they laughed, until Jess went back to the hotel room. She shut the door, sighing. The room was warm, the sounds of the party still faintly audible through the walls. She moved to the bathroom, splashing cold water on her face. Then she looked up and screamed. In the mirror, just behind her, stood the woman, drenched in water, her mouth twisted into something that was not a smile. The knocking began again, louder, relentless. Lisa and Matt came running, banging on the door. Jess backed away from the mirror, trembling. The knocking echoed in her skull. The woman's voice whispered once more, "You shouldn't have come." The lights flickered. Then everything went dark. Story the end.
Story number 5.
The road stretched endlessly ahead, cutting through the dense, humid forests of Louisiana. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, and the sky was a dull gray, promising rain. Claire sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone, trying to get a signal. Next to her, Ryan kept his eyes on the road, his fingers drumming lightly on the steering wheel. From the back seat, Jenna sighed loudly. "Are we seriously lost?" "We're not lost," Ryan muttered. "The Airbnb is just further out than I thought." "It's in the middle of nowhere," Claire said, giving up on her phone. "No signal, no other cars, just trees for miles." Ethan, who had been dozing off, sat up and yawned. "This place better be worth it." "It will be," Ryan assured them. "Huge house, private lake, total isolation. We'll party for a week and won't have to worry about noise complaints." As if to prove his point, he turned down a dirt road, the tires crunching over gravel. The trees loomed closer, their branches twisting overhead, forming a dark tunnel. The road narrowed the further they went, until finally the house came into view. It was massive, an old Southern-style home with peeling white paint and tall windows. The porch wrapped around the front, its wooden planks warped and cracked from years of neglect. The lake stretched out behind it, calm and still, its surface reflecting the darkening sky. Jenna wrinkled her nose. "Okay." "This place looks haunted." Claire laughed nervously. "It's got character." Ryan parked the car and they climbed out, stretching their legs. The house felt off. The air was too still. No birds, no wind, just silence. Ethan grabbed the bags from the trunk. "Come on, let's check it out." The front door groaned open with a push. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the scent of dust and old wood. The furniture was covered in white sheets, and a massive chandelier hung in the center of the foyer, its crystals dulled by time. "This is actually kind of cool," Claire admitted, running her fingers over the carved banister. Jenna shivered. "It's cold in here." Ryan flicked on a light. The bulbs flickered before casting a dim glow. "We'll warm it up. Let's unpack, get some drinks going, and make this place feel like home." The sun dipped below the trees as they settled in. Music played softly from Ryan's speaker, and the four of them lounged on the old couches, drinks in hand. The house didn't feel as eerie now, just old. Then came the footsteps. Soft, slow, from the second floor. Jenna's head snapped up. "Did you hear that?" Claire swallowed hard. "It's probably just the house settling." The footsteps stopped. Ethan exhaled. "Yeah, old house, weird noises, nothing creepy, but the air felt heavier now, as if the house itself was listening." That night, Claire woke to a sound, a slow creaking, like someone stepping on an old wooden floor. She blinked in the darkness, her pulse quickening. The room was silent now, save for Jenna's soft breathing beside her. Then, another creak. From the hallway, Claire sat up, her mouth dry. The door was slightly open, revealing a sliver of pitch-black corridor. She strained her ears. Nothing. She reached for her phone. No signal. She exhaled and lay back down, forcing herself to relax. Just as sleep began to take her, the door creaked open. Her breath caught. She stared into the darkness, heart pounding. A shadow stood just beyond the doorway. Tall, motionless, watching. Claire couldn't breathe. Then the shadow stepped back. The door slowly shut. A floorboard creaked, and silence. Claire didn't sleep for the rest of the night. By morning, she was exhausted. She barely touched her coffee as the others laughed and ate breakfast. "You look like hell," Ryan said, pouring more syrup on his pancakes. Claire hesitated, then told them about the shadow. Ethan laughed. "Damn, you were probably dreaming." Jenna shook her head. "No, I heard something too, like footsteps." Ryan frowned. "Guys, let's not freak ourselves out. It's an old house. Weird noises happen." Claire wanted to believe that. She really did. The day passed quickly, filled with swimming in the lake and drinking by the fire pit. By the time night fell, Claire almost convinced herself that nothing had happened, until she went to bed. The air was freezing. Jenna mumbled in her sleep, turning over. Claire curled under the blankets, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. Then, knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Claire's blood turned to ice. She turned her head toward the door. The knocking came again. Jenna stirred. What? The knocking stopped. A heavy silence filled the room. Then, from the other side of the door, the knob turned. Claire's breath hitched. It twisted once, then again. Jenna was sitting up now, clutching the blanket. Claire? The knob stopped moving. Then, in the silence, a whisper. Let me in. Claire's heart nearly stopped. Jenna whimpered, gripping Claire's arm. What the hell? Claire reached for her phone, fumbling for the flashlight. She turned it on, and the door was open. Wide open. A figure stood just outside. No features, no eyes, just darkness in the shape of a man. Jenna screamed. Claire lunged for the lamp, switching it on, and the figure was gone, just an open doorway leading to an empty hall. Ryan and Ethan burst in a second later. What the hell happened? Claire and Jenna were shaking. There was someone there, Claire whispered. Ryan checked the hall. There's nothing here. Ethan rubbed his face. Okay, maybe someone broke in? Jenna shook her head violently. No, it wasn't human. They didn't sleep that night. The next morning, they packed. Fast. As they loaded the car, Ryan ran back inside to grab his phone. He was gone for too long. Claire felt her stomach drop. Ryan? No answer. Ethan ran in after him. A moment later, they heard Ethan scream. Claire and Jenna sprinted inside. Ryan stood at the base of the staircase, staring blankly ahead. Ethan was shaking. He was just standing here like this. Ryan's eyes were vacant. Then he blinked and whispered in a voice that wasn't his, "She won't let us leave." They dragged him out of the house, practically throwing him into the car. Ryan didn't speak again until they were miles away. His voice was hoarse when he finally said, "I don't remember anything." They never spoke of the trip again. When Claire checked the Airbnb listing weeks later, it was gone. No record of the house, no reviews, no history, as if it never existed. It's the end.
Story number 6.
The drive to Blackwood Beach was supposed to be fun. Long stretches of highway, windows down, music blasting, exactly how Claire, Jordan, Melissa, and Tyler had imagined their spring break. They had spent months planning this trip, booking a secluded beach house on the Gulf Coast. No crowds, no distractions, just the 4 of them relaxing by the ocean. But as they drove deeper into the coastal backroads, the excitement began to fade. The highway had turned into a cracked 2-lane road, lined by dense trees and swampland. No streetlights, no gas stations, just endless miles of wilderness. The GPS signal flickered on and off. "Are we sure this is the right way?" Melissa asked from the back seat. Jordan, who was driving, glanced at the screen. "Yeah, I think so." "You think so?" Claire muttered. "Great. Relax," Tyler said. "It's probably just a little out of the way. That's what makes it a hidden gem." They drove on in silence, the trees thickening around them. The road felt narrower. The sky, now a dull gray, seemed lower, pressing against the tops of the trees. Finally, after what felt like hours, the road opened up to a clearing. The house stood at the end of a sandy driveway, overlooking the ocean. It was bigger than they expected. A tall, 2-story beach house, its wooden exterior grayed with age, the shutters slightly crooked. The wraparound porch creaked in the breeze, and an old wooden swing hung motionless on one side. Claire exhaled. "Okay, this place is definitely haunted." Jordan smirked. "It's fine. It just looks old." Melissa stepped out of the car, stretching. "At least the beach is nice." Beyond the house, the ocean stretched endlessly, the waves lapping gently at the shore. The sand was smooth, untouched, no footprints, no other houses in sight, total isolation. They carried their bags inside. The air was thick with the scent of salt and old wood. Inside, the house was furnished but dusty, as if it had been cleaned but never lived in. The furniture was old-fashioned, worn leather couches, a massive wooden dining table, and oil paintings of unfamiliar landscapes. The strangest thing was the mirrors. Every room had one. Large, antique mirrors with ornate gold frames hung at odd angles on the walls. Some were cracked, their surfaces warped with age. "I don't like this," Melissa muttered, eyeing a particularly large mirror in the living room. "It's just decor," Jordan said. "Yeah, creepy decor," Claire added. They unpacked, explored the house, then headed to the beach. The water was cold but inviting. The salty breeze a welcome change from the stagnant air inside. For a while, everything felt normal, until the sun started to set. As they headed back, Claire glanced up at the house. A figure stood in one of the upstairs windows. She froze. It was just a shadow, a vague outline of a person standing perfectly still, watching. A chill ran down her spine. "Guys," she whispered, grabbing Jordan's arm. "Someone's in the house." They all turned. The window was empty. Jordan frowned. "Are you sure?" Claire hesitated. She had seen it. She knew she had. "Maybe it was a trick of the light," Tyler offered. Claire swallowed. "Yeah, maybe." That night, they made dinner and played drinking games, trying to shake off the unease. But something about the house felt wrong. The air was too heavy, the shadows too deep. Melissa excused herself early, claiming she was exhausted. Claire followed soon after. In her room, the large mirror faced the bed. She draped a towel over it, not wanting to see her reflection in the dark. She drifted into a restless sleep. Somewhere in the night, a noise woke her. A soft tapping. She opened her eyes, her breath catching. The towel had fallen. The mirror was uncovered. And something was moving inside it, not her reflection. Something else. The shape was wrong, too tall, its limbs too long. It stood just behind her reflection, its head tilted unnaturally to one side. She couldn't move. Her body was frozen, her breath shallow. The thing in the mirror leaned closer. A whisper brushed her ear. "You shouldn't be here." Claire gasped and sat up, her heart pounding. The mirror was normal again. Just her reflection. But she didn't sleep for the rest of the night. At breakfast, Melissa looked pale. "I had the worst nightmare." Claire hesitated. "What was it?" Melissa shuddered. "I was in bed, but I couldn't move, and I saw something in the mirror. It was standing behind me." Claire's blood ran cold. She wasn't the only one. Tyler yawned. "You guys are psyching yourselves out." Jordan nodded. "Yeah, let's just have fun and not focus on..." Then they heard it. A sharp thud from upstairs. They all froze. Jordan slowly stood. Someone else is in the house. The four of them crept up the stairs, their footsteps muffled by the old wooden floors. The hallway stretched before them, lined with doors. Another thud. Claire pointed. It came from that room. Jordan hesitated, then pushed the door open. The room was empty, except for the mirror. It was shattered, the glass in jagged pieces on the floor. Melissa whispered, "We need to leave." Jordan rubbed his face. "Guys, come on. The house is old. Things fall." Claire's stomach twisted. That's not what happened. That night, they locked their doors, but the knocking came anyway. Slow, rhythmic, from inside the walls. Claire lay stiff in bed, clutching the sheets. The air was freezing. Then the doorknob turned. She stopped breathing. It turned again. Click. The door creaked open. A dark figure stood in the doorway. It had no face, just a black void where its eyes should have been. Claire squeezed her eyes shut. "It's not real. It's not real." Then it whispered, "Leave." Claire's eyes flew open. The room was empty. The door was shut. She scrambled out of bed, rushing to the others' rooms. Melissa was already awake, pale and shaking. You saw it too. Jordan and Tyler were silent, their faces drained of color. "We're leaving," Claire said. "Now." They packed in minutes, practically running to the car. As they pulled away, Claire glanced back. A figure stood on the porch, watching. The next day, they tried to find the listing for the beach house. It was gone. No record of it ever existing. When Claire checked the location on the GPS history, the road wasn't there. As if the house had never been real. But they knew the truth. It had been real. And something in it hadn't wanted them there. Story the end.
Story number 7.
The road to Myrtle Cove was lined with towering pines, their branches weaving together to block out the late afternoon sun. The car was packed tight, suitcases stuffed in the trunk, a cooler wedged between seats, and the energy of 4 college students buzzing inside. Lauren sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone, while Jake, her boyfriend, focused on the winding road ahead. In the back seat, Emily and Chris argued over the music. The plan had been simple: spend spring break at an old rental house near the beach, away from the chaos of crowded resorts. Cheap, private, and supposedly beautiful. It seemed perfect. But as they turned off the main road onto a narrower, overgrown path, the excitement dimmed. The house was deep in the woods, far from any neighbors or streetlights. The GPS flickered, then lost signal entirely. "Are we sure this is the right place?" Emily asked, peering out the window. Jake checked his phone. No service. It has to be, he said. There wasn't another turn. The car slowed as the house came into view. It was big, older than expected, its white paint peeling under the weight of time. A wraparound porch sagged slightly, and the tall windows reflected only the dimming sky. The ocean wasn't visible from here, but they could hear the distant roar of waves. Lauren exhaled. This place looks abandoned. Chris grinned. Nah, just rustic. They unloaded their bags quickly, eager to shake the unease creeping up their spines. Inside, the house smelled of dust and seawater, the wooden floors creaking underfoot. The furniture was antique, heavy with history, and the walls were lined with faded paintings of ships and stormy seas. Emily shivered. This place is giving me murder documentary vibes. Lauren chuckled, but something about the house felt off. The air inside was thick, heavy, like stepping into a forgotten space that hadn't been disturbed in years. They explored the rooms, choosing bedrooms. There were 4, each with its own massive gilded mirror. Strange, considering the house's age. Who needs this many mirrors? Emily muttered. No complaints, Chris said, flopping onto his bed. This place is huge, and we have it all to ourselves. Night fell quickly, swallowing the house in darkness. They built a fire in the stone fireplace, opened beers, and settled into easy conversation. The eerie feeling from earlier started to fade. Then the knocking started. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. From upstairs, the room went silent. Emily's eyes widened. Did you hear that? Lauren swallowed hard. It's probably the house settling. Then it came again. 3 knocks. Jake stood. I'll check. Lauren grabbed his arm. Don't. He hesitated, but Chris was already halfway up the stairs. Come on, it's probably just a draft or something. They followed, their footsteps cautious. The upstairs hallway was long, dimly lit by an old chandelier. The sound had come from the last room on the right. The door was closed. Chris turned the knob. The door swung open to reveal an empty room. A single bed, a wooden chair, and a mirror. It faced the doorway directly, reflecting the 4 of them. Jake frowned. We definitely heard something. Lauren's stomach twisted. The mirror felt wrong. The reflection was too dim, the room inside it darker than the actual one. Chris waved his hand. See? Nothing. Then behind them the floor creaked. Lauren turned so fast her vision blurred. No one was there. Okay, Emily whispered. I don't like this. Jake exhaled. Let's just go back downstairs. They left the door open and retreated to the living room, turning the music up slightly louder than before. No one mentioned the mirror. By midnight, they decided to call it a night. Lauren curled up beside Jake in their room, listening to the ocean's distant rhythm. She had almost drifted off when she felt it. The bed shifted slightly, like someone had just sat down. Her breath caught. Jake was still, asleep. She slowly turned her head toward the mirror. The reflection wasn't right. There was something else in it. A figure, standing just behind the bed. It was tall. Its face was wrong, blurred like smudged glass. Its head tilted slowly, watching her. Lauren's throat closed. She squeezed her eyes shut. The bed shifted again. A whisper brushed against her ear. Get out! She gasped and sat up. The room was empty. The mirror showed only her pale face. The next morning, she told the others. Chris scoffed. You were dreaming. Emily, however, looked sick. I heard it too, she said quietly. In my room, I swear, something touched my shoulder. Jake rubbed his face. Okay, let's not freak out. We have 3 more nights here. Let's just enjoy the beach. Lauren didn't argue, but the heavy feeling in her chest didn't leave. That night, the knocking returned. 3 knocks, but this time from inside the walls. Chris cursed under his breath. Nope, I don't like that. Jake grabbed a flashlight, maybe an animal. Then the power cut out. The house plunged into darkness. Emily whimpered. We need to leave. Lauren reached for her phone. No signal, no Wi-Fi. Then from the hallway, footsteps. Slow, heavy, moving toward them. Chris whispered, There's someone in the house. Lauren held her breath as the steps reached the living room entrance, but nothing was there. Just darkness. Then, the mirror in the hallway cracked. A deep, splintering sound. Lauren turned. The reflection had changed. In the shattered glass, the living room looked darker, and in the center of the reflection, something moved. A shadow. Not theirs. Jake grabbed Lauren's hand. We're leaving. Now. They bolted. No one grabbed their bags. No one looked back. As they sped down the narrow road, the house grew smaller in the rearview mirror. Then Emily gasped. Did you see that? Lauren turned. A figure stood on the porch, watching. They drove until they reached the next town, finding a small motel. No one spoke as they checked in. Only when they were safe inside did Chris whisper, "What the hell was that?" Lauren shivered. Something that didn't want us there. The next morning, they searched for the house online. There was no listing, no address, no record that it had ever existed. But they knew the truth. And when Lauren looked in the motel bathroom mirror just for a second, she saw something standing behind her. Story the end.
Story number 8.
The last thing Emily expected for spring break was to run for her life. It was supposed to be an easy trip, 1 week away from college, from exams, from stress, a getaway to a rented beach house in a small coastal town with her best friends, Hannah, Jake, and Ryan. They had booked the house months in advance, lured in by the rustic charm of the old colonial-style home sitting on the edge of a private stretch of beach. The pictures online had shown a wraparound porch, whitewashed walls, and massive windows overlooking the sea. A dream vacation. When they arrived, though, something felt off. The house looked the same as in the photos, but there was something about the air around it, something heavy, something stale. The property manager, an older woman named Mrs. Caldwell, had handed them the keys without much small talk. Before leaving, she muttered, "Lock the doors at night, all of them." Then, as if an afterthought, she added, "And don't go walking the beach after dark." It was an odd warning. The town was tiny, barely a dot on the map. The crime rate had to be non-existent. What was there to be afraid of? Still, the group shrugged it off. They had a whole week ahead of them, and nothing was going to ruin their trip. The first few days were everything they had hoped for: sun, sand, and late-night bonfires. They laughed, drank, and stayed up late telling stories. But by the third night, things started to change. It started small. Emily woke up to strange noises outside the window. Whispers, faint and distant, carried by the wind. She convinced herself it was just the waves. But then there were the footprints. On the fourth morning, Ryan was the first to wake up. He found them in the sand just outside the house. Deep, sunken footprints leading from the dunes straight up to the porch. Except they weren't theirs. Jake tried to reason it away. "Probably some drifter passing through," he said, but even he didn't seem convinced. The house was isolated. There were no neighbors, no nearby houses. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. The house creaked and groaned like it was settling into itself, but there was something else. Something outside. She climbed out of bed and tiptoed to the window. The beach was barely visible under the moonlight, the waves lapping gently at the shore. But then she saw it, a figure standing in the surf. It was distant, too far to make out clearly, but its posture was unnatural, rigid, unmoving. Watching. A shiver crawled up her spine. She reached for her phone, trying to capture a picture, but when she looked back up, the figure was gone. The next morning, she told the others. "You were probably dreaming," Hannah said, pouring herself coffee. "We were all drinking last night." But Ryan frowned. "I don't think she's making it up." They all turned to look at him. "I heard something too," he admitted. "Last night. Sounded like someone trying the door handle." The room fell silent. It was the first real moment they all acknowledged that something wasn't right. That night, they locked every door, bolted every window, but it didn't help. Emily woke up gasping, her heart pounding in her chest. It felt like something had yanked her out of sleep. The room was pitch black, and then there was a knock, not at the front door, at her bedroom door. Soft. Deliberate. She held her breath. "Hannah?" she whispered, barely loud enough to hear herself. Silence. Another knock. She reached for her phone, her fingers shaking as she turned on the flashlight. Slowly, she swung her legs out of bed and crept toward the door. She placed her hand against the wood, feeling the cold seep through. Then, scratching. Long, slow scratches, like fingernails dragging down the wood. She yanked the door open, shining her phone's light into the hallway. Empty. Except the attic hatch was open. A chill ran through her. The attic had been locked when they arrived. They hadn't touched it. Emily backed into her room and slammed the door, locking it. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. At dawn, she told the others what happened. Jake climbed onto a chair and pushed the attic hatch shut. "Probably just the wind," he muttered, but there was doubt in his voice. That evening, the whispers came back. They weren't outside this time. They were in the house. Low voices, murmuring in a language none of them understood. They came from the walls, from the floor, from the attic above. Then, just as suddenly as they started, they stopped. No one slept. By the next morning, they had made up their minds. They were leaving. Early checkout, screw the money. But when they tried to pack, something strange happened. Their suitcases wouldn't close. Every piece of clothing they stuffed inside ended up back on the bed, unfolded, as if someone or something was unpacking them. Emily's hands were trembling when she grabbed her phone to call for help. But there was no signal. The others checked theirs. No service. No Wi-Fi. Panic set in. Then the front door swung open on its own. The beach stretched beyond it, the morning fog rolling in thick. The wind howled, carrying something with it. A voice. Faint. Calling. A single word. Emily. She staggered back, her pulse roaring in her ears. Jake grabbed her arm. We need to go. Now. But as they stepped onto the porch, the fog thickened. The world beyond became a shapeless void. And in it, shapes began to move. Figures. Dozens of them, standing just at the edge of visibility, watching, waiting. Then, as one, they took a step forward. The friends turned and ran back into the house, slamming the door shut. For the next few hours, they huddled together in silence, too afraid to move, to speak, to breathe. The whispers returned, circling them like invisible predators. Then, the attic hatch creaked open again. A rope dropped down from the darkness above. And then, footsteps, slow, deliberate, descending. Jake lost it. He grabbed the nearest object, a lamp, and hurled it toward the attic entrance. The moment it hit, the footsteps stopped. Then silence. The next morning, the fog had cleared. The house was quiet. The air felt lighter. They wasted no time grabbing their things and getting the hell out. They never looked back. When they got home, Emily did some research on the house. What she found made her blood run cold. The house had once belonged to a family in the 1800s. They had vanished without a trace. Every tenant after them reported the same things. Whispers, figures on the beach, the attic door opening on its own. No one ever stayed longer than a week. Emily and her friends never spoke of what happened after that. But sometimes when she's alone at night, she swears she can still hear it. A voice in the dark whispering her name. Story the end.
Story number 9.
We were all looking forward to spring break. After months of exams, late-night study sessions, and the stress of college, the 5 of us, me, my boyfriend Jason, my best friend Claire, her boyfriend Ethan, and our friend Matt, wanted nothing more than to escape for a week. Instead of the usual crowded beaches or wild parties, we decided to go somewhere more private. Jason's uncle owned a cabin in West Virginia, deep in the mountains, overlooking a secluded lake. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was free, and that was good enough for us. The idea of being completely off the grid, surrounded by nothing but trees and water, sounded perfect. It was a 5-hour drive from campus, most of it on winding roads that grew narrower the deeper we got into the mountains. By the time we arrived, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees. The cabin was old but sturdy, made of thick logs with a wraparound porch that overlooked the dark lake below. A wooden dock stretched into the water, and a small rowboat bobbed lazily at its end. There were no neighbors, no cell service, just the sound of the wind through the trees and the occasional splash from the lake. "This place is kinda creepy," Claire said as we stepped out of the car. "It's awesome," Jason grinned. Ethan chuckled. "Feels like we're in one of those horror movies where college kids go missing." I laughed, but I felt a strange unease settle in my stomach. Something about the air felt heavy, like the forest was watching us. Inside, the cabin was simple: 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a stone fireplace in the living room. The furniture was old but comfortable, and the walls were decorated with faded photographs of people we didn't know. "Check this out," Matt called from the bookshelf. He held up an old guest book, its pages yellowed with age. He flipped through the entries. Most were just names and dates, with the occasional "had a great time" scribbled in. But as he got to the more recent pages, the messages changed. Strange noises at night. Thought I heard footsteps outside my window. Didn't sleep well. Something felt off. Who else is out here? The last entry, dated almost a decade ago, simply read, "If you hear it, do not open the door." We all exchanged uneasy glances. "Probably just someone messing around," Jason said. Claire forced a laugh. "Yeah, just some prank to freak people out." We shrugged it off. That night, we sat on the dock, drinking beers and watching the stars reflect off the still lake. It was eerily quiet. No frogs, no crickets, just the occasional rustling in the trees. Then Matt threw a rock into the water. The splash echoed loudly, but instead of fading away, the ripples seemed to keep moving outward, unnaturally slow, as if something beneath the surface was stirring. Claire shivered. That was weird. Relax, Ethan said. It's just water. I wasn't so sure. Later that night, we all went to bed. The cabin had 2 bedrooms, so Jason and I took one, Claire and Ethan the other, and Matt took the couch. I woke up sometime after midnight to a sound. Knocking. Soft, slow, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the front door. I sat up, heart pounding. Jason was still asleep beside me. I strained to listen. Tap, tap, tap. Then Matt's voice. Guys? His voice was shaky. Do you hear that? Jason stirred beside me. What? Someone's at the door, Matt whispered. Jason sat up. It's probably the wind. Then why is the doorknob moving? A chill ran down my spine. I slipped out of bed, Jason following close behind. Claire and Ethan had woken up too, peeking out of their room. We all stared at the front door. The knob twisted slowly, like someone was testing it. Then silence. Matt took a shaky breath. I'm not opening that. Jason grabbed a flashlight and shone it through the window. The beam illuminated the empty porch. No footprints, no signs of anyone outside. Nothing. We didn't sleep much after that. The next morning we tried to shake it off. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe it was just our imagination. We spent the day out on the lake, rowing the boat, swimming, trying to enjoy ourselves. But that feeling of being watched never left. Then Claire found something in the woods. She had wandered off while collecting firewood and came back pale, holding something in her hand. An old key, rusted, large, heavy. I found it in a tree, she said. It was wedged between the roots, like someone hid it there. We had no idea what it belonged to. There were no other houses nearby. That night, the knocking came back. Tap, 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 tap. I sat up instantly. It was louder this time, more insistent. Claire whimpered from the other room. It's back. Jason grabbed the flashlight again. He shined it through the window, and then we saw it, a figure, standing just beyond the porch, near the tree line, tall, motionless, watching. We froze. Then it moved, fast. Jason dropped the flashlight. Get inside, now. We slammed the doors, locked them. The knocking continued, and then whispers. Low, ragged, just beyond the door. Matt's voice was barely a whisper. What the hell is that? None of us answered. We huddled together in the living room, barely breathing. Then the whispers stopped. A loud thud rattled the door, then another, like something was trying to break in. We grabbed whatever we could, kitchen knives, fireplace pokers, but then just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence. We didn't sleep. By morning, we were packed and ready to go. We practically ran to the car. Then Claire gasped. She pointed to the ground near the porch. There were footprints leading from the lake, not to the lake, from the lake. We sped down the mountain road, not stopping until we were hours away. A week later, I got a text from an unknown number. No words, just a picture, a photo of the lake with footprints leading out of the water. I never told the others, but sometimes late at night, I still hear knocking. Soft, slow, waiting. Story the end.